Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
From Ukraine to Iran, recent conflicts are offering hard lessons about deterrence, resilience, and the pace of modern warfare. At the center of the Army's response is the Space and Missile Defense Command, charged with protecting the homeland and shaping the future of strategic defense. Here to talk about how the Army is adapting its posture, partnerships, and priorities to meet the moment, and what it means for the next generation of conflict, is the Commanding General of SMDC, Lieutenant General Sean Gainey. Lieutenant General Gainey, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's great to be here, Terry. Thank you.
Let's first of all start with SMDC's mission, Space Missile Defense. What are the biggest changes you've seen in how the Army approaches space and missile defense since you took command?
Army Space and Missile Defense Command is a warfighting command that is the Army Service Component to 3 COCOMs. First, we're the Army Service Component Command to SpaceCom, where I provide Army Space Forces, training ready Space Forces to that command to support not only the global space mission, but also the Army's close fight mission with space capabilities. And as the Army Service Component Command to NORTHCOM, we provide 100th GMD and the 49th Missile Defense Battalion that provides intercontinental ballistic missile defense for the homeland for NORTHCOM. And then we also are the Army Service Component Command to STRATCOM, really focused on intel and some of the logistics set in the theater aspect that we work closely with our North. As far as the Army's concerned, as far as changes to our mission set, it's really the space side. The missile defense side, we've been doing for a while. We do that well. We'll continue to improve that mission set with improved GBIs. But from the space side, the Army is embracing the space capabilities in the close fight at the tactical edge. And to be able to do that, the Army is investing in the capability necessary to do that mission set, enabling this command to transform in contact. And what I mean by that is we're able to take rapid prototyping, getting out to our soldiers, have them train with those prototypes and that capability, and then rapidly improve the current capability that we have. The Army's also invested resources into the personnel side of the Army space mission. We are now moving from a construct where we had air defense soldiers, signal corps soldiers, and military intelligence soldiers manning the space capabilities to a MOS that's space-focused with a space MOS background. And so we'll be able to build the depth necessary in our non-commissioned officer corps as we move forward. So that's probably the biggest change inside of our command's mission set. And as the proponent for Army Space, we'll drive that not only inside of this command, specifically in our 1st Space Brigade, but also in our multi-domain task force, where we have space capabilities in those locations also.
I just want to push a little farther because the Army is a ground force, right? So how does that fit with a space mission?
It fits perfectly. The way current warfare is being executed, where there's a heavy reliance on space assets, to be able to do exactly what you highlighted, that ground fight of being able to shoot, move, and communicate, you need to be able to interdict the space assets. And the Army having those assets in the close fight to be able to interdict space and to enable maneuver, enable over-the-horizon communication, and enable precision strikes falls back on our ability to assist them with our Army space assets.
And so then how does the Army space mission actually integrate with Space Force coming out of the Department of the Air Force?
I think very well with Space Command as the integrator of both of the services. So Space Command works very closely with U.S. Army Space and Missile Defense Command as the Army service component, and working closely integrated with the Space Force. They're able to allocate Army assets where necessary and where appropriate globally, and do the same with the Space Force. Now, our mission set is focused more on the maneuver aspect with the Army forces, but we do play a critical role in the global execution of SpaceCom's space operations mission inside of their UCP.
I'm speaking with Lieutenant General Sean Gainey, the commander of the U.S. Army Space and Missile Defense Command. So, General Gainey, with that kind of organizational structure as a backdrop, I want to shift to some ongoing operations where missile defense has been a key aspect. Let's start with the Iran-Israel conflict. What are the lessons that you and Space and Missile Defense Command are taking from that conflict?
Inside of the command, based off of what's been going on in that conflict and the Ukraine-Russia conflict, we're actually in the process of writing a new air and missile defense strategy in 2040 to capture a lot of those lessons learned and moving forward, and taking those lessons learned and putting it into action inside of this command. And a lot of the things we're learning are validation to how we're moving forward with our air and missile defense modernization plan moving forward. And that's the ability to deal with complexity. We're seeing a lot of complexity from long-range missiles to drones to cruise missiles, all in an attempt to overwhelm the operator with different type of interceptors to create different problems for the operator on the system. So part of our modernization program, the critical linchpin of that is the Integrated Battle Command System, also known as IBCS. So as we modernize with IBCS, we now have the operator with the ability to sense, decide, and engage with several different sensors or shooters to get after that complexity. So no longer will we focus a single system on a single threat. It's our systems of systems will focus on a range of complex threats to be able to defeat those conflicts. So that's lessons learned, number one. Lesson learned, number two, we're also learning is the overwhelming saturation of missiles, cruise missiles, or drones that our operators will see on the modern battlefield. And the ability for us to layer in several different effectors and sensors to be able to increase our magazine depth is something we're learning. And whether we do that with lower cost, endless magazine depth of interceptors or leverage technology with directed energy and high-powered microwave to assist in that layer approach is how we're looking at it. And then the last lesson learned, and this is something we're seeing more in the Ukraine-Russia fight, is how the threat is now hunting the air and missile defense assets on the battlefield. And part of that complexity that they're leveraging is an ability to catch the air and missile defense systems off guard and then go in and target them and try to take them off the battlefield, because then they're able to enable their targeting process. And so what we're doing is we're looking at several different ways of how to get after passive defense measures with different technologies that are out there, how to disperse our capabilities, which IBCS will provide us the opportunity to do. And I know I said last, but one more area I want to highlight, I love this topic and I can talk forever about it, is missile defeat. One of the things we're also learning, and we have to drive, and we're driving in our 2040 strategy, is you can no longer get missile defense as active defense only, meaning systems able to take out interceptors one-on-one. You got to employ a missile defeat construct where you're going after the holistic missile stockpile, whether it's on the ground, whether it's in the supply chain, but apply a whole of government effort around that to get after true missile defeat so you can attrict the missiles prior to the threat shooting the missiles. And however you do that, it's supply chain or on the ground, all of it works together.
Well, thinking about all of those lessons learned and the 2040 strategy that you've alluded to, Congress just approved billions of dollars for the president's Golden Dome initiative, which is fundamentally a missile defense strategy. What's your perspective on that?
We're in line in looking at the executive order. All the things highlighted in the executive order, like the missile defeat portion I just highlighted, is part of that executive order. And then leveraging a range of capabilities in a layered manner. And the executive order calls out more space-based type assets to leverage in the layered approach. But again, more systems you can leverage to get after the magazine depth of the threat will enable the organizations to really get after this missile threat. And, I'm excited when you talk about defense of the homeland, because, our 100th GMD is doing that right now, defending the homeland And those soldiers do a great job in Alaska and Vandenberg in executing that mission, and proud of the work they do day in and day out to currently protect the homeland.
Well, just circling back to Ukraine, as you mentioned earlier, our missile defense inventory has been in the news related to Ukraine, where the president wanted to send more Patriot missiles, and there was a delay because the Defense Department needed to take inventory. What is your sense of the domestic industrial base capacity to meet the demands that Golden Dome and these expanded strategies will place on it?
General Gutlein, who's just confirmed, is the acquisition head for Golden Dome. Now, I'm sure that's something that he's going to look into early and assess and be able to get some feedback and then put forth a strategy to move forward with. I can tell you that the industry base is excited. They're looking forward to it. I've talked to several of the industry team that I normally talk to, and they're excited to find ways to help. And I'm sure General Gutlein's going to energize them and work out a strategy to best get after it.
I've been speaking with Lieutenant General Sean Gainey, commander of the U.S. Army Space and Missile Defense Command. Sir, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Terry. My pleasure.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.
What makes a great leader in government? Christine Harada joins WEPA CEO Shane Canfield to reflect on her journey from aerospace engineering to the White House. In this episode, she shares lessons on public-private collaboration, leading with purpose, and why service, not power, should guide leadership.
Hello, and welcome to the Lessons in Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA. Today, I'm joined by Christine Harada, former senior advisor at the Office of Federal Procurement Policy within the Office of Management and Budget. Ms. Harada, welcome, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
You spent portions of your career working in both the public and the private sector. And from your experience, what makes leadership in the federal sector different than the private sector?
At the highest level, leadership in the public sector is very fundamentally at its core mission-driven. Right? The work is in the service of the public good, and the goals and the programs are frequently long-term, they're systemic, and they're incredibly complex. And success, isn't necessarily measured by quarterly earnings. We don't have that kind of drumbeat, but certainly more by the lasting impact that we have on Americans' lives. What's also unique about public sector is, in my view, the profound sense of history that you feel. And I think certainly I was very aware about the work that I was doing and how it builds on the efforts of those who came before me, and that future generations of leaders also depend on the decisions that were being made today. And that, for me, certainly provided a greater weight of responsibility.
That's a wonderful answer. And I was in the private sector for much of my career, and now WEPA is a nonprofit, and I really relate to what you said about being mission-driven rather than profit-driven. You've got a long-term view, and always at the core of it is serving others.
Yes.
Is there a moment that stands out to you from early in your career that influenced your leadership style later on?
I started out my career as an aerospace engineer, building satellites and airplanes. And when I first entered the workforce, my organization at the time had 120 people. We were a large company, 120 people, 4 women, and I was the only woman of color. I was also the youngest throughout the entire organization. And so, I remember having an experience when I was doing some engineering work. We had a design review, and I had seen some issues with the flight software that I pointed out. At the time, they're like, maybe it's not really that big of a concern. I was like, but in my heart, I knew that the issue was real and stayed with it. And sure enough, a few weeks later, that topic came up again, and we addressed it. Turns out my concern did indeed prove to be valid. And so it's just one of those experiences that really sank into me around ensuring that I am listening to everybody, period, end of story, within the organization, really thinking through about how do we take into consideration opinions from all different spectra. As a third-generation Japanese American, right, I was raised to be humble, keep your head down, and work hard, etc. But at times, leadership also requires you to speak up, do so politely, with courage, etc. Even though you may be the only voice in your room, but certainly trust your voice. It also really helped shape my belief around diversity. DEI programs right now are viewed in a negative light. We're all mosaics. and they become better because you have those different experiences. And that's really stayed with me throughout the entirety of my career.
The diversity issue is a really big one coming from the insurance industry. That's an industry which is working on that. It's really a diversity of viewpoint and perspective and experiences that does influence your business, and more diverse employee bases absolutely helps. Was there a time in your federal career, perhaps when you were at OMB, that you faced what you consider a real challenge, and how did you overcome it?
One moment that really stands out in particular was when I was serving as the Federal Chief Sustainability Officer during the Obama administration. We had set, like many administrations, had set some really ambitious goals, very, very, very ambitious goals around how do we think about making the federal government's operations much more sustainable. But the challenge wasn't so much about the scale or the technical capacity of the organization. A lot of it was really centered around the funding. We overcame this largely by being very strategic, helping out with blocking and tackling with the variety of legal issues or legal questions that might have come up, like how do we address this? Certainly in the federal government, you're more often leading through influence as opposed to pure form authority, and that you really need to listen deeply, communicate clearly with folks, building out those coalitions and engaging with your stakeholders. And I know many folks in government speak like that, but that is the truth.
As someone who's spent time in both the federal and the private sectors, what makes the relationship between the two sectors important?
Certainly, it's an absolutely essential partnership, and I would add on to that like nonprofits or philanthropic organizations. As I mentioned before, I'm Japanese American, and in Japan there's a symbol for thunder, which looks like 3 arrows pointing around each other in a circular pattern, kind of to represent the swirl, if you will, of clouds. And that's kind of how I view the relationship between the government, the private sector, and the nonprofit sector. The government frequently sets the vision, the policy, the direction, but of course it's the private sector that brings the capital, the innovation, the skill set, the capabilities, et cetera, to be able to execute. Partnering with that, of course, are the nonprofits who may be supporting the surrounding society. Public-private collaboration is not just about contracts or compliance, but it's also about figuring out what's your shared purpose. That's when real transformation can and does actually happen.
In life insurance, there's a concept, lifetime value, where bringing a new insured in costs a lot more money than the amount of premium. And so when you talk to commercial carriers, it's a similar kind of thing. You need to bring them into the concept that they're going to be with us 20 years, and after 5 years, you can ride through that. But it's a concept that isn't easy for commercial businesses to understand. That's a partnership too. Very, very similar. What advice would you give to somebody aspiring to become a leader in government?
There are 3 things, right? So firstly, around leadership in government, you want to make sure that you're leading with purpose. You want to stay grounded in your values, and don't underestimate the power of relationships. Remember why you entered public service in the first place, and that'll help carry you through some of the inevitable challenges that you're going to face. Making sure that you are also investing in relationships. In government, you rarely have full control, and I think this is, in my view, more important in government than perhaps in the private sector. You are frequently leading through influence. You are collaborating with very different parties who frequently have very different agendas than you do. And so building that trust, investing in building that trust and planting those seeds earlier and along the way in your career, I think is absolutely critical. And certainly last but not least, I would say, don't feel that you have to have it all figured out on day one. Absolutely stay open to the unexpected. Say yes to the opportunities that stretch you, and know that you can lead from wherever you are. It's not just about position or hierarchy. It's about the impact that you can have.
What wonderful advice, especially in today's world, which is a little topsy-turvy. Who is one person, someone you know personally, or perhaps someone well-known, that's impacted your leadership style?
The leaders that particularly stand out for me are Colin Powell, a woman named Carla Harris, who was a managing director in investment banking, and then last but not least would be my father. Starting with perhaps the more famous one, Colin Powell. I read his biography, loved his perspectives and the rules of leadership that have been particularly influential for me, right? So get mad, then get over it. Share the credit. perpetual optimism, a force multiplier, things of that nature. And hearing his story was certainly very inspirational for me. And so I certainly very much look up to him as a role model. The second person that I mentioned is a woman named Carla Harris. She's an African-American woman, became a managing director at an investment bank in the 80s, at a time when there were not that many women of color in investment banking in New York. And so she's published a book called Her Pearls of Wisdom. It's one of her trademarks. She always wore a pearl necklace, and she has Pearls of Wisdom around how can you be authentic and build relationships to be successful in super challenging environments. And she had a lot of guidance on the importance of finding sponsors and mentors. And certainly last but not least, my father is really my why for I do a lot of the work that I do in the public sector. He started out life like many other, immigrant kids in poverty. He was a strawberry farm laborer. Japanese Americans at the time were not allowed to own the land, so we worked the land. He grew up in that kind of environment. And I just think it's absolutely neat that someone who came really he was dirt poor, to say it, and his daughter ended up working in the White House twice. It's quite the American dream, and I would very much like to have that opportunity available for other people as well.
Well, wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Christine, thank you very much for your time today and all of these learnings. It's really good, impactful. Thank you for sharing.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
I'm Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA. Until next time on Lessons in Leadership.
Find the full podcast and future episodes of Lessons in Leadership on the Federal News Network app and anywhere you enjoy your podcasts.